let us do our LessWrong posts, yes?
Yes.
Our last two episodes were inspired by the zombies post and one of the follow-up posts, I guess. And there's two more follow-up posts, which we will zip through pretty quickly here, because I think they don't really address the actual thing that Chalmers was talking about, and so they're not really all that relevant.
Well, we could be just talking about the almost Chalmers style zombies, but I think we did a pretty good job covering these in the last two episodes.
Yes.
So yeah, we'll push through them. But the generalized anti-zombie principle.
That is the first one. Real short TLDR is that it's about a switch that if you push the switch, it'll turn off your consciousness. In our analogy that the three of us were talking about, it probably like a device that makes your atoms stop affecting the consciousness field or mess up the connection in some way so it doesn't vibrate right to make consciousness or something, so that, all your atoms are still doing all your things, but there's no consciousness there, is what this supposed switch would do.
Yeah, which to me sounds a lot like, let me press this button and suddenly this magnet will stop working. It would really have to rattle the laws of physics to do that.
Well, it would, except the magnet wouldn't stop working, because the magnet is still doing physical stuff. It would just remove the magnetness of the magnet, but it still does all magnet things.
maybe that doesn't translate to that analogy.
Yeah.
You're right. So like the thing is like, it's not clear to me, and I don't think Liam or even Chalmers really would sign on to that. Maybe Chalmers would. I can't model him that well. Would sign on to this idea of a button that would turn off his consciousness.
Oh, I think they totally would. Because if the idea is that there's some other law of physics, then maybe you can make a device that interacts with those physics. Like, how before we couldn't take pictures of people's bones with x-rays because we didn't know how x-rays worked, and now we do, and now we can. This would be like an x-ray that, not quite an x-ray, but again, using new physics that we don't know to make new effects.
That beats me to the line I was going to say, which is that it would essentially need to be magic, and it would be sufficiently advanced technology that would look magic.
Yes.
I remember I was at a one of James Randi's amazing meetings. I think it was Dawkins asked him, couldn't somebody come to you and claim your $1 million? James Randi had the $1 million paranormal challenge, where if you could demonstrate a supernatural, paranormal, or occult ability under controlled test conditions, you'd get $1 million.
Yeah.
Dawkins asked him, couldn't somebody come along with something like the equivalent of radio before radio was widely known or discovered and fool you? Randi sat and thought about it for a minute, and he said, yeah, I suppose they would, but then we would have publicized the discovery of the radio. I think that'd be an okay use of the money.
Yeah. What a cool guy.
Right. But I think to that effect, or in that same vein, like this consciousness stopping button would have to be that same kind of Clarke's third law level of technology.
Absolutely. When Liam said that Eliezer doesn't really talk about Chalmers' hypothetical, I think this is why. Eliezer says that anything that makes your consciousness go out like a light should make you stop talking about consciousness. Let me know if you don't think this is right, but to me this sounds just like a massive misunderstanding of Chalmers, because the way we talked about it, consciousness doesn't have any effect on anything that happens in real life. Everything continues happening exactly the same way, whether there's consciousness or not. It's just that, I don't know, there's no experiencer experiencing things trapped in the consciousness plane. Or I would say trapped in the consciousness plane. I guess Liam would too, but I guess it doesn't feel that bad for him to be trapped. I was really, really weirded out by that whole interaction.
Maybe we need another couple hours, because I actually don't think that we addressed this level of question there, because I'm not sure if Liam's version of consciousness has no effect on what happens. In Liam's explanation, what would make a P-zombie write a book about consciousness? In one version of that, he just said the typewriting monkeys, but that wouldn't translate to like turning consciousness off.
Yeah, I don't know if this was just for the sake of arguing Chalmers' point, but he went along with all the laws of physics are the same. The particles that make up our brains make us type things, and therefore the P-zombie would still type. Zombie David Chalmers would still write the book about consciousness and argue the same things.
Fair enough.
So yeah, then Eliezer says that even after switch is flipped, I will still talk about consciousness for exactly the same reasons I did before. If I'm conscious right now, I will still be conscious after you flip the switch. And I think this is where the breakdown happens, because the first line is correct, that after you flip the switch, the physical body will still talk about consciousness for exactly the same reasons, because it's still got those atoms moving. But the second line is his misunderstanding, because those atoms moving also makes a consciousness field creates something that feels stuff, even though it can't affect anything. And so he would still talk about consciousness for the exact same reasons, but wouldn't be conscious anymore. I think it may sound like I'm being harsh on this post right here, or harsh on Eliezer for writing this post and misunderstanding Chalmers, but I really think he did it because he was interpreting Chalmers in the most sane way possible. Like, literally everything happens for the exact same reasons, but the consciousness just doesn't happen is an insane position, in my opinion. And I can't fault Eliezer for assuming that Chalmers is not insane and trying to engage with the not insane version of the belief.
And if he missed the mark on Chalmers a bit, like, I think it's fair, because I don't think he spent hours and hours, learning everything he could and discussing it with an expert, right?
Yeah.
I think he wanted just to engage with I think the first Zombies post started out with people say I don't engage with real philosophy enough. Well, here you go.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an easy case of where I think philosophy is missing the mark dramatically, and that's how we got here. So I don't think it was the result of a careful, long, deliberate conversation, but it was still a valuable contribution.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
He says a little in later on the post, like, could we define the word consciousness to mean whatever actually makes humans talk about consciousness? And I think we could, if we were sane. Yes, we could do that. He later says, if the word refers to anything at all, it refers to something that is, among other things, the cause of my talking about consciousness. Consciousness, among other things, makes you talk about consciousness. And that is just not true of Chalmers' representation of the world. Consciousness does not do anything. It certainly doesn't make you talk about consciousness. All it does is there is a feeling-ger entity out there that feels consciousness. So the whole post seems to talk past Chalmers, in my opinion.
Which is, again, fair.
Yeah.
As you stated, as you kind of laid out earlier, I think he's talking to a different version of Chalmers, and not one that I think he was deliberately mischaracterizing.
No, I mean, the whole thing, it kind of reminds me of the Trinity or transubstantiation, right? Where transubstantiation specifically, it's a thing where you're eating these crackers and this wine, and after they do the ritual on it, it becomes the body of Jesus and the blood of Jesus. And you ask, you look at them and you're like, this still looks like a cracker and this still looks like wine. And they're like, yes, the atoms are all the same. It is still wheat atoms in there. It is still grape atoms. Nothing has changed about the physical properties of anything you're touching. It's just that now it actually is the body of Jesus. And it's so ridiculous. I think it's made to be there on purpose to destroy logic and reason. You shouldn't be introducing logic and reason into this religion. You either accept this contradiction and say, I am so dumb, I cannot understand God, or you reject the whole thing and become a reformed Catholic or whatever the hell, And that is what this sort of zombies discourse sounds like to me.
You're missing the secret third path, which is where you just conclude that Jesus was made of wine and crackers.
Damn it, you're right.
But yeah, no, I think that's a fun analogy, and I think it works pretty well. Their whole thing is maybe the early church argued that we are actually changing the substance of this to something else. And even though they could all look at it and say it still looks like wine, anyone who said that was crucified, or whatever, hung. I guess they weren't crucifying. The Catholic Church, it wasn't crucifying people.
I can't possibly imagine that being true, because even the dumbest peasant can see that, a cracker's a cracker and it is not human flesh.
Right, but only the dumbest peasant would say that. Right?
Well,
the slightly less dumb peasants will notice that, but they'll be like, well, I don't want to get killed, so I'll go ahead and make the right noises to the church, right?
I think they would just be like, oh yeah, it's definitely Jesus's body in a spiritual sense. And believe it,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's magic.
Which, I mean, I realize that's a little unfair to the position, because Liam would say, no, it's not magic, it's physics we don't know of yet. But this is very much what it feels like to me, when it's saying it doesn't affect anything, not even talking about itself.
Well, I meant the transubstantiation thing.
Yeah.
Consciousness is, and I think, unfortunately, we kind of conflated a handful of things. I think we were mainly talking about just qualia, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, in fact, I just got a notification from my doorbell that it noticed motion, right?
Nice.
It's not conscious of it, but I was conscious of the notification.
Yeah, but that consciousness of that would not make you talk about it.
About
Yeah, about you noticing it.
It did, though.
No, it was the atoms processing things in your brain that made you talk about it. The consciousness is just the experiencing of it.
Oh, sure. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. It's a nutty position, in my opinion, but what do I know?
I think that I honestly think there's less daylight between you and Liam than you guys both think. There's just like one nugget of special sauce missing that would make you guys both be like, "Oh yeah, of course," and sign on to that statement. Maybe we'll figure that out at some point in the future.
Okay. Well, since this post is titled "The Generalized Anti-Zombie Principle," I would like to know what that principle is. And he says the generalized anti-zombie principle says that if I do something to you that alters your consciousness, let alone makes you a completely different person, then you ought to notice somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's fine, and that's a good generalized anti-zombie principle. The fun kind of caveat about that second part of that sentence, that let alone makes you a completely different person than you ought to notice. You know, if I wiped your memory and started you Inyash from scratch, but with a different
Mm,
history,
yeah,
that person would just wake up thinking that they've been that person the whole time. You actually would never notice,
right.
but you might notice if your consciousness flickered off. That sounds fair. I've
I,
had that experience once. Well, I guess under psychedelic influence, I've had it in a different form. But one time I got like borderline blackout drunk, and
that's right.
yeah,
I think
and
I
that
was
was
there for that time, right?
you were that was
Yeah.
when I tried to go clubbing, and this was years ago. I'm probably more equipped to try again, but or
It's
better
weird
equipped
because
than I was before.
you hadn't even had that much to drink. It was some combination of setting and something.
So I remember I'd skipped dinner and I had modafinil, which I learned that day
Mm.
makes alcohol hit harder.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't have much dinner, and I had like 3 or 4 drinks, and they're heavy pours at that place. So,
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, it was a nice mixture of ingredients that led me to like suddenly realizing like, oh, I'm over in this part of the club now. And then at some point, you found me and you asked if I was good, and I was like, oh, if I'm being checked on, I'm clearly need to go home. So I managed to get all the way home. I don't know if I was conscious of the whole trip there or not. So
Okay. I don't think you necessarily need to go home if you're being checked on. Like if I'm going with friends to a club, there'll be sometimes periods of time where I don't see them for a half hour longer if they're off doing something, dancing with someone else. But I still like to check in on them every now and then, be like, "Hey, everything cool?" You know?
yeah, let me rephrase. I think my realization at the time was he has right to be checking in on me.
Mm,
And the reasons that I think he's concerned about are accurate, and I should go home.
okay. You did seem out of it.
I was out of it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I wasn't having a bad time, but I
Yeah.
was I was not totally present.
Yeah. I will say that I think Liam would argue that, in fact, he would notice something if his consciousness was altered. It's just that nobody else in the universe could notice anything.
Well, I mean, and that's true if you get a little high or if you're tripping a little bit. You'll notice something differently, but you could keep it together enough in front of other people.
You could possibly hide it enough, yeah.
Yeah.
But in this case, there's no way anyone could tell anything is different, even in principle. Only
Right.
you would ever know. It's
All
just
right.
yeah, kind of sucky. All right. There's two little things I pulled out at the end here, which are not related to the central thesis. But he says that whatever makes me talk about consciousness, it seems likely that the important parts take place on a much higher functional level than atomic nuclei. Someone who understood consciousness could abstract away from individual neurons firing and talk about high-level cognitive architectures, and still describe how my mind produces thoughts like "I think, therefore I am." He used this as a hypothetical that someone might say this is basically what I think, which is why I think going down to new physical laws is the wrong direction to go. But this was a hypothetical statement, not a thing that he was putting forward as the actual truth.
Yeah, it's not going to be the kind of thing that's like, oh, because the subatomic particles are moving this way. Because as he points out in the post, like those things are impacted by on the micro scale all the time. He compares it just to the thermal noise of the room moving your atoms around. Like
Yeah,
if that's not screwing you up, then it's not screwing up your consciousness. Uh,
right.
so it would need to be something above and beyond that. I think he's probably right.
What do you make of his mysterious concluding phrase here?
How far can you generalize the anti-zombie argument and have it still be valid? The makeup of future galactic civilizations may be determined by the answer. I suspect that he's getting at something along the lines of he doesn't anticipate humans running on our current substrate in the future.
Yeah,
And so if the anti-zombie argument doesn't refute and he has like a dialogue of people arguing about whether or not being replaced, you're having your neurons replaced with transmitter or transistors would turn them off or change them or whatever.
Hmm.
If it in fact would, we don't actually know, right?
Yeah.
It seems on its face totally plausible that I should be able to run on a different substrate, but maybe not.
Yeah.
I think it's totally fair to say, you know what, I'm not really sure. Since we don't know what makes the experience happen exactly, we don't know how to replicate it yet, and it's not clear that switching out my brain meat for other stuff would actually do the same thing, right? So the future of galactic civilizations may be determined by the answer, because if it turns out that we believe incorrectly that we need to stay on the meat substrate, then that'll hinder our civilization going forward, right?
Yeah.
But also, if we're wrong in the other direction, that could this isn't, I think, the point he was making. But if we're wrong in the other direction, that could also fuck us, right?
Right. Then there would just be a bunch of machines pretending to be humans running around, but there's nobody home.
I can totally see that happening in a bad future. Whether or not that's a future running, or with people running around with circuits in their heads instead of neurons, or if it's just a future of LLMs talking to each other, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about you? What's your take?
That was what I came to after thinking about it for a little bit.
Right on.
It would determine like what counts as an entity, and whether people are willing to turn themselves into cyborgs or other things, or if they're stuck in their meat suits, and what legal rights software entities might have. All those things.
I'm really curious. We're going to be hitting that threshold at any time now.
Yeah, we'll see it in our lifetime.
We'll see it in our lifetime in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
Which hopefully won't be near the end of our lifetime.
Strong agree.
All right, let's move on to GAZP versus GLUT. Those are two acronyms.
What do these acronyms stand for?
Well, Generalized Anti-Zombie Principle, and GLUT is Giant Lookup Table.
I felt that there isn't a lot here to talk about, because basically he talks about the hypothesis that you could create a device which would output the exact behavior of a human in every conceivable circumstance. So that's indistinguishable from a human. But it doesn't actually do any of the computations or information processing that we associate with conscious beings. It's just a giant lookup table where it takes an input, runs it through a lookup table, and then executes a specified output. To the point where, like, a giant lookup table of David Chalmers would live his life and write his book about zombies and all that, but there's never anything there doing any processing. It's just using the lookup table to output actions and words. And the question the post puts forward is this a conscious being? And the answer is no, obviously. And LCSR comes to the same conclusion.
I think it wouldn't be either. I loved his analogy or his example at the beginning. Like, you could make a lookup table for like multiplication, and so instead of like writing a function that multiplies two numbers, you instead pass in the function and it makes a database call, passing in the two numbers you gave it, and then returns the answer. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You imagine this impossibly, physically impossibly large lookup table and run a person on it, and like, yeah, okay, sure, in principle, quote unquote, that's imaginable.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that is, that's not a conscious person.
Yeah.
I think that we could all agree to that.
Yeah. And he quickly points out that whoever created the giant lookup table is the actual consciousness behind all this. Kind of like, if there's a zombie that isn't responsible for anything, but there's a zombie master controlling it, the consciousness is in the zombie master. And likewise, if the giant lookup table is controlling the zombie, then the consciousness is in the person who put together the giant lookup table.
With the caveat that, of course, you could have one or more levels of removal from the conscious entity.
Yes. He does eventually get down to like, oh, what if it was entirely by random? And then he's like, then obviously no, it just wouldn't be conscious. But then he interrogated how did you get a completely random lookup table that just happens to perfectly replicate a human like David Chalmers throughout their entire lifetime? That seems incredibly improbable. And then that brought us to what I thought was the really interesting part of the post, which was follow the improbability. I guess quickly we start that off with a story about Richard Feynman. When he was young, he played a game with his dad called Follow the Energy, where any expenditure of any energy anywhere on Earth could eventually be traced back to the sun, right? Like, why was his wind-up toy moving? Because he cranked up the spring. How did he get the energy to crank up the spring? He ate some food. Where did the food come from? Ultimately, it was plants that were powered by the sun. And you can get that for literally everything. Eliezer says rationalists have a game called Follow the Improbability, Every improbable seeming belief needs an equivalent amount of evidence to justify it. Unless one had access to some kind of evidence for this belief, it would be highly improbable for a correct belief to form spontaneously. And the example he gave was Russell's teapot, that someone believes there just happens to be a teapot orbiting the rings of Saturn. I'm not sure if that was the exact example he gave, but it was something like that. And he says that in Follow the Improbability, it's highly suspicious to even talk about a specific hypothesis without having had enough evidence to narrow down the space of possible hypotheses. Why aren't you giving equal airtime to a decillion other equally plausible hypotheses? It's not realistic to suppose that you could spontaneously start discussing the true hypothesis by pure coincidence. And how that relates to zombies, I will leave as an exercise to the reader.
That's fair. It reminds me of a not that distant episode that we did about, why aren't you discussing these other decillion equally plausible hypotheses?
Yes, as to why, what was it? Why the universe exists or something?
Like, why are there lots of people or something?
Okay, yeah.
Whatever. Actually, many parts of that argument fell apart at that step.
Yeah.
Privileging one hypothesis over the other. But
yeah. It's a very common thing that people try to get away with when they're trying to hide, when they have a specific thing they want. And they're just kind of, at some point, they sneak in something which is extremely improbable.
Yeah. you gotta at some point along your chain of reasoning turn a small probability into a large one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can find where someone did that, you can be like, okay, no, you have broken the rule of having enough evidence to narrow down your probabilities.
Totes.
Alrighty, right near the end of the post. So this was written in 2008. He addresses why he's even talking about this. April 2008. He says, in this line of business, you meet an awful lot of people who think that an arbitrarily generated powerful AI will be moral. I kind of remember this. I don't think you get that anymore in 2024, do you?
I think there's still some popular proponent of that.
Okay.
It might be, I don't know if it's Scott Aronson or somebody else, but somebody is still pushing that point that I've heard in the last year, since the new popular AI conversations have been happening.
Okay. I not surprisingly agree with Eliezer when he says you can account for an AI that does improbably nice things by telling me how you chose the AI's design from a huge space of possibilities, but otherwise the improbability is being pulled out of nowhere. And that's worrisome for those of us who do not want to be killed by an AI.
Yeah. I'm watching a fun discussion that's it has a fun debate format with Eliezer and a podcaster named Dwarkesh Patel.
Yeah.
And their back and forth on this is a lot of fun. And Eliezer's basically having this at the part that I was most recently listening to is basically having this part of the argument.
Oh, good.
And it's just what you're going to say, just because it's outputting the right actions, it doesn't mean you understand why it is, which means you can't count on it doing other actions for that. Like this, you can't put your brain in its head, right? So it's fun to watch these conversations.
Yeah,
and it's kind of fun that he's been having them for almost 20 years.
Yeah,
I know this was 2008, but he mentions in the podcast he's been doing this since the early 2000s. But
well,
anywho.
what are we reading next time?
Next time we've got Belief in the Implied Invisible and Quantum Explanations.
Excellent. Looking forward to that.